This is a brief demonstration of a forms generator for the CPI docket system. CPI provides a built-in forms generator. I think it's called a letter generator, but I'm not sure that it gets used much. That might be because non-docket personnel, including attorneys and their assistants, don't routinely interact with docket systems and therefore aren't very proficient docket system users. But those same non-docket people stand to benefit the most from a docket-driven forms generator. After all, they're the ones who prepare most of the documents in a typical IP practice. Non-docket people tend to live in the word processor world, which these days means Microsoft Word in most cases. As you watch this demo, notice that the only program I'm running is Word. I'll begin by opening Task Manager so that you can see that I'm not running any docket modules. In fact, I'm not even running Word at this point. I'll click this butterfly icon to open the graphical user interface for the forms generator. It's a fairly simple interface. Here on the left we have a series of user selectable form types. In the middle here we have a list of people who are authorized to sign forms. In the lower left, we can indicate how the form will be sent to its addressee. On the right here we have a few options for including signature images, selecting predefined form content, etc. I'll begin by accepting the defaults that we see here. These defaults are separately customizable for each individual user. Since letter to client is what most users create most of the time, that's most users' default choice. Cynthia Cowan is the default signatory in this example, which would be the case if I was Cynthia or if I was working as her assistant, since I'd usually be generating documents for her signature. These days most items go by email, so that's most users' default send via choice. So I'll just type in a docket number and click OK to generate a letter to client with Cynthia as signatory. Now what just happened? Well, the tool grabbed a letterhead template, dove into the CPI docket system to extract a lot of information corresponding to the docket number that I input, and stuffed that information into the template in the appropriate places. Specifically, as we can see, the client's name and address was extracted, and the case particulars that you can see in this reline, all of those particulars, were extracted from the CPI docket system and stuffed into the template. Notice that I did not run any CPI docket modules. I did not even indicate which docket module this case is on. It happens to be a patent case docketed in the CPI docket module, but cases on other modules like the trademark or general matters modules are handled in the same way. The user doesn't need to know anything about such docket system nuances. All the user needs is a valid docket number. I might mention that these keyboard fields come with the template and simply there to flag areas that the user is going to substitute or replace with appropriate content for the situation at hand. Now sometimes a wet signature is preferred, and to accomplish that I could simply delete the electronic image of Cynthia's signature. In practice this would be a digitized image of her actual signature. But the other option is to go back to the interface and uncheck this Insert Signature Image box, re-enter that docket number, and regenerate the form. So here we get the same thing, but this time without Cynthia's signature image. I'm just showing this because whether that box is checked or not is separately customizable for each individual user. Some attorneys insist on hand signing everything, so they and their assistants would want that box unchecked by default. Let's try that same docket number again, but this time I'll check the Open Insert File dialog box and the Letter Has Enclosures box. When I click OK, we then get the familiar Windows File Explorer, which you'll notice is pointing to a directory up here having contents specific to foreign patent cases. Now, this content is context sensitive depending on the nature of the docketed case type. The actual content is going to be provided by the user in each case. Most firms have lots of content of this sort, so they can just add it, update it, etc. at will. Here I'll choose content for the situation in which we want to send a patent grant document to the client, and here is the result. I've chopped out most of the actual content. That of course is the content that I've highlighted there. Again, though, the content is easily provided by each end user to suit their particular office practices and preferences. Again, with the same docket number, let's move away from the letter to client default and choose instead this letter to foreign associate item. Clicking OK this time gets us a letter addressed to the docketed associate for this case, including the associate's file reference number, as we can see here. I might mention that everything you see here, the ABC IP law firm, its attorneys, and all of the case particulars is of course fictitious. I've made all of this up to facilitate this demo. Let's try a different docket number. And again choose Letter to Foreign Associate and check the Open Insert File dialog box. Now, as you'll see in a moment, this happens to be a European patent case, and you'll notice that the content presented is again context sensitive depending on the nature of the docketed case type. This time we see content specific to European patent cases. I'll just click Cancel without choosing any content, and you can see this gets us a letter addressed to the docketed associate for this case, including the associate's particular file number and all of the other docketed particulars for this European patent matter. Back to the previous docket number again. Let's try letter to owner this time. You'll recall that the client and owner may and often do differ, and it's sometimes necessary to directly contact an IP rights owner. This easily facilitates that sort of situation. Again, using the same docket number, let's try letter to CPO, USPTO, CARO, and oops. Well, here we have an error message telling us that this is not an appropriate selection for this particular case. Recall that this case corresponds to an issued Japanese patent. We would not normally want to write to the Canadian Intellectual Property Office or to the USPTO or to the Canadian PCT Receiving Office regarding a Japanese patent. Many different user-friendly logic exceptions of this sort are included in this tool. Moreover, everything that you see is driven by tables incorporated in a database. That is, the user defaults, the error trapping logic, the signatories' names, etc., are all table driven, so everything is easily customized for different users. I'll just click OK to dismiss that, and we'll carry on with this same docket number. Let's just try letter to undocketed party this time. This does get us a result. This is for situations requiring correspondence with parties who are not identified in the docket system. For example, a one-off letter to a technical expert. You would replace this keyboard code with that technical expert's name and address, and you'd replace this keyboard code with the appropriate salutation for that expert, so on and so forth. Then the letter content would be inserted down here. And because some folks still like to use fax communications, we need to handle that, and that's easily done by changing the sent via item option from the email default to fax. I'll just use the familiar docket number that we've been using all along here. This time you'll see that we get the same letter to client, but this time the letter is pre-populated with the client's docketed fax number, so we're ready to go. Some folks even like to send fax cover sheets, and we can accommodate that by using this fax plus fax transmittal sheet option. I'll click OK, and as you can see, that gets us a fax cover sheet with all of the usual cover sheet delivery particulars, including an appropriate confidentiality notice, which would be completed in the template for the particular user's situation. The actual letter to client comes on the second page and is completed as previously explained. Courier delivery situations are readily handled by using this courier option, and that just substitutes the words by courier where previously we saw the fax number. Let's try this letter to CPO, USPTO, etc. with a, well, I'll pick a US patent case. This time we do get a letter addressed to the USPTO, because this, as you can see, happens to be a US patent case. Again, notice that I did not have to indicate that this is a US case or even indicate that it's a patent case. Again, that's determined by the docketed case type with logic error checking, as I mentioned before. Also notice that our hypothetical ABC IP law firm happens to use a different letterhead without any attorney names for USPTO correspondence. Now let's try this response, CPO, USPTO, etc. for that same US patent application. Here the tool has grabbed a user configurable response template, extracted information corresponding to the docket number that I input from the CPI docket system, and stuffed that information into the template in the appropriate places. Cynthia is again the signatory, and this time we see her signature block with her PTO registration number, etc. These signature blocks, like the other templates, are all user configurable. Again, we have the option of context-sensitive content insertion by opening the or checking the Open Insert File dialog box I'll do the same form, but with that box checked. We'll use the same U.S. patent case and see what we get this time. Here's our content, and probably I want to use something like this amendment template in a typical case. So we can scroll down and you can see that it has pre-populated the form with that user provided content, which of course in this example is going to correspond to the USPTO regulations, procedures, etc. for amendments. Most firms have boilerplate text for amendments comparable to what you see here. As another example of case type driven form generation, let's try a different docket number. With the letter to CPO, etc. option. Here we get a letter to the Canadian PCT Receiving Office. As you can see, because this case is docketed as a PCT case, which does not yet have a Canadian national serial number. After a Canadian national serial number has been allocated to this case by the Canadian Intellectual Property Office, and after the docket system is updated to reflect that serial number, entry of the same docket number and selection of this letter to CPO option would yield a different letter addressed to the CIPO, not the Canadian PCT Receiving Office as we see here. And that letter would have a reference line populated with the Canadian national serial particulars for the case instead of the PCT particulars that we see here. Now sometimes you need not one form but several forms related to a particular task. In filing a patent application, for example, you might want a cover letter to the patent office, a petition as we use in Canada, various declarations, an assignment, etc. This is easily handled, as I can show you. Just input an appropriate docket number, click OK, and it's handled via a template having separate sections for all of those things that I mentioned. As we can see here, we've got a Canadian National Phase Entry request. This is obviously a PCT case that's about to enter the Canadian National Phase, so there's a request for Canadian National Entry pre-populated with a lot of data yanked out of the CPI docket system and stuffed into the template. Here's another request for a subtly different variation of the same thing. Here's a inventorship declaration. Here's an assignment document. I think we wind up with, yes, a small entity declaration. Some of these sections won't always apply to the situation at hand, so the user just deletes those sections and works with what's left over, saving each section as completed as a separate document. Let's switch gears again and try another case. And I'll just accept the basic defaults. Click OK. And as you can see, now we're talking trademarks. Notice I did not have to indicate that this is a trademark case. Also notice that this case involves a design mark, and we can see the actual mark embedded in the generated form. A very handy feature. If you've worked with clients having large portfolios of design trademarks, some of which tend to differ in rather subtle ways from one another, it can be very convenient to have the actual trademark image embedded in each document as it's generated. This is also table-driven via a database. Users can readily scan each trademark save the scanned image in a directory for extraction via path names that are stored in a database table. Here's an example of what you get via this Memo To File option. I'll use that same trademark docket number. Any docket number would do. Again, this is based on a user configurable template for a standard Memo To File. And I'll conclude with an example of what you can get via this letter to opposing counsel option. I'll use a docket number for a litigation matter and just click OK. And this case happens to be docketed on CPI's General Matter module. I didn't have to indicate anything of that sort, of course. We're shielding users from those sorts of docket nuances because they're not docket people. That's not who this tool is directed towards. Again, this result is based on a user configurable template, and again, everything is coming out of the CPI docket system. The opposing counsel address, the description for the particular case, I'll just clean that up a bit. All of this information in the reline that you see here comes straight out of the CPI docket system. That concludes this brief demo. Thanks for watching.